Okay, welcome everybody to Spocktoberfest. This is our first Spocktoberfest for Spocktober 2015. I'm Kevin C. Neece. I'm the author of the forthcoming book, The Gospel According to Undiscovered. I'm also the editor of the book Spockology, which is a collection of essays about Spock and Leonard Nimoy, featuring many of the people that you see on our illustrious panel here below me. And we're really excited to be doing this. A little bit late for those of you who are trying to watch us live. We had some technical issues and also time change issues. It's daylight saving time here in the good old USA, where we still practice that wonderful thing. So I'm going to go down the line and just have everybody introduce themselves to you. Let's start first of all with our featured guests. We're going to talk to Mike Poteet. Mike is a tell us about yourself, Mike. He's a contributor to the Spockology book. He wrote a couple of pieces that are in the Spockology book. And
yeah, I'm very thankful to have two pieces in the Spockology book, two posts from the Undiscovered Country blog, and you found me and invited me to contribute to that because you'd read some of my pieces at the Sci-Fi Christian, and I've been writing for them for about 4 years. And I have been a Star Trek fan for a lot longer than that. I became a Star Trek fan sometime around 1984. I had just moved to a new middle school and was making new friends, and the local station played the original series at 5 p.m. every afternoon, and they said, "Have you ever watched this show?" And I said, "No." And they said, "You should give it a try." And I did, and I'm so glad they did. I've always been a fan of the show, and I formed some good friendships around that. So very glad to be here and excited to be with the other contributors and to see the book.
Fantastic. It's good to have you here, Mike. And next we're going to go to Neil Shirley, just because he's the next one on the list here. Neil is another contributor to the book, Spockology. And tell us about yourself there, Neil.
Yeah, my name is Neil Shirley, and I've been a Star Trek fan since second grade. It was one of these... it's a transformative show. It's amazing the lasting influence it can have in all parts of my life. I mean, even to the simple thing, the first books I ever bought were Star Trek books. When I had my own money as a kid, I bought Star Trek books. There was just something about it, and one of my pieces in the Spockology book actually partly talks about that, about what a journey it's been. Spock's and Leonard Nimoy's kind of running influence in my life, and I'm thrilled to be a part of that book.
Great. Well, it's very good to have you here, Neil. We've got some video delay on some people on this, so if there's an awkward pause after you're done talking, that's fine. Okay, now we're going to go to our other featured guest, Renee McKenzie, and Renee is the editor-in-chief at Thinking Through Christianity, and she is another contributor to Spockology. So go ahead and
Hi, everybody. As Kevin said, I am the editor-in-chief over at Thinking Through Christianity, and we love what Kevin does at the Undiscovered Country Project. It's very Thinking Through Christianity, or we think so anyway. And I contributed a chapter to Spockology on the very controversial rebooted Spock in the J.J. Abrams reboot series, and so I was happy to do that. And I grew up watching The Next Generation, which is a little bit telling about my age, and I've been sort of working my way backwards ever since. But over this past year, I've been getting into Deep Space Nine, and am currently watching Voyager for the first time. So I'm having a good time playing catch up.
Fantastic. Well, it's good to have you here, Renee. I've done much the same thing in my life, so I completely understand the catch up play. And now our special guest for the broadcast. A man who, in my world, needs no introduction, Mr. Steve Neill. We'll need to unmute there, Steve, so we can hear you.
Now I'm unmuted.
There you go. I'll take care of the meeting. You go ahead, yeah.
Star Trek started for me when I was in high school and it first aired, and I immediately fell in love with it because I always preferred science fiction that was visionary about the human races, our people now in the future, and I really loved Roddenberry's vision of us finally being at peace with ourselves as one race and exploring space, which to me was one of the greatest things, most important things we can do. And I've always felt that if we actually get into space and start exploring space together, that we would eventually drop our differences and start working together more and more. So my perspective has always been, since I was a huge supporter of, and still am, of manned exploration of space in the 60s up to the present day. Back in the 60s, they always say, well, we need to fix our problems down here first before we go into space and take them out there. Well, I never looked at it that way. I always looked at it, if we start exploring space, we will be so amazed by what we find and how we work together that we will solve our problems on Earth by doing that. So for me, Star Trek was an incredible step in that direction. Not to mention, it launched the future we're living in now, at least technologically speaking. The space program has been shortcoming, but we're starting to pick up some steam again. It's never too late. But Mr. Spock was always my favorite character because, he was this very wise role model, this very brilliant thinker who always had great philosophy that I've tried to apply to my own being in my life and how I interact with other human beings and how I view the world, and also the hope that I have for it to succeed that I know it will do. So Mr. Spock was always a great role model. And of course, the first thing I tried to do in high school, besides make the tricorder and the phaser, was to figure out the ears, which eventually led to me coming to Hollywood and actually doing Leonard Nimoy's ears for the first motion picture, which is something that to this day I am awestruck by.
Yeah, it's we'll talk more about your story too, Steve, because that's and of course you're here to also announce our winner for our giveaway. You've been very kind all these years throughout Spocktober to contribute some of your ears that you make off of those original mold 9. And to people who are in our giveaways. So we're excited to be doing that today as well. And speaking of ears winners, we have one of those people here with us today. Well, actually, we have two of them. Neil, I think you won them one year. And then we also have Mr. Brandon Coles. Please say hello to us, Brandon.
Oh, hello. How are y'all doing?
Good. It's nice to see you. So you're tell us how you're connected here.
On Star Trek, I've been watching it since I was 5. Here on Google Plus, with another friend of mine, we do Star Trek hangouts, and on Facebook, I mainly administrate the DeForest Kelly group, and I'll show you you all. This is what the ears I won last year. And can you see it good?
Yeah, there's a little bit of reflection, but there it is. Yep.
I thought there might be a little delay there, but yeah, there we go.
Oh, there's a good shot of it. There it is. Yeah. And so that certificate came with your ears, and then you put it in that shadow box there. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Very cool. Awesome. Well, thank you for being here, Brandon. It's very cool to have you, and he was also our technical advisor today, so that's wonderful. And then lastly, we have our guest here, Becky Skipper. Let's go ahead and hear from you. Can you introduce yourself? If I can unmute you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
There you are. Hi, Becky.
Okay, hi. I've been a Star Trek fan ever since I've grown up and watched it with my mom in the 80s, and I really started watching Star Trek more in 2010 onward after the 2009 movie. I actually heard about the Undiscovered Country project through Trek FM. Spock is one of my favorite characters, along with Data. I find them very inspirational, and Star Trek's vision is part of what's helping me and many fans around the world look at ourselves and think, how can we become better human beings? And then UCP's approach is great, kind of putting two things together, Christianity and Star Trek, in a way that it's really creative, and I'm so glad that someone's out there doing that. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Becky. Becky has been around UCP for a long time, and we're glad to have her involved on here today. She'll be able to ask some questions later on, and if you are joining us live, you may be able to ask questions too. I don't know. I tried to turn the feature on for that, and it wasn't working. So you may be able to contact us if you can email me or something like that. At kevin@kevincneece.com, or you can try to get a question in. Or Twitter. Yeah, that's a good idea, Renee. Twitter. At UCP as well. Okay. So let's talk we're going to talk to our contributors individually here, just a little bit about their contributions to the book, to Spockology. So let's start with Mike. You did a couple of it for us, and let's talk about those. The works of Spock's hands and ours. That's one of my favorites.
Well, thank you. You're very kind to say that. I was telling my teenage son about this conference today, and he said, "So what did you write?" I said, "Well, I wrote a piece talking about how Spock uses his hands, and I connected that to Bible verses about how God wants us to use our hands." And he said, "Dad, you could have done that for anybody." I don't think he was duly impressed. but I'd always been struck by the end of Psalm 90, where the psalmist prays, "Lord, prosper the work of our hands." And I always thought, that's a pretty bold prayer, to ask God to give success to what we're doing with our hands. So what kind of things should we do that we would want God to bless, or that we would expect God to bless? So I've been thinking about that off and on for a long time. And then your invitation to write for your blog for Spocktober came, and just thinking about Leonard Nimoy's performance, he was such a masterful actor, and so many factors went into that. But I remembered watching him on a special he did right after Star Trek II had come out, where he talked about his deliberate choices of what he did with his hands when he played the part of Spock. And I put the two together and wrote the meditation for your blog, and I reread it again today for the first time, and I'm still pretty pleased with it myself, so thank you for including it.
That's good. Well, I'm glad we have it in there. I was particularly struck because by what you did with that, because you start out talking about, well, what is Spock's most important physical trait, and most people point to the ears, and you said no, his most important physical feature is really his hands, and the way he uses his hands as an expression of his character. And I think that's something that a lot of people, I'd never heard commented on before, but that's one thing that, coming from an acting background, I know we're often talking about what you do with your hands. Nimoy had the presence of mind as an actor to think about what he did with his hands, even down to inventing the nerve pinch instead of punching a guy out
Right.
for a particular episode, so that Spock could be a more peaceful being. I really liked that, and I really appreciated that insight. Had you thought about that before you came to write the piece?
I hadn't thought about it in quite that way. I mean, I know Nimoy said he invented the nerve pinch also to save himself a lot of running and jumping around, but it does build up the character as a byproduct. It makes sense that somebody who's devoted to logic and peace, partly just by nature and a lot by choice, Spock being half human has to fight those more aggressive impulses that humanity seems to have. It's just how intelligent an actor he was, those to think it through on all those levels. And he talks about this in his autobiographies as well, how and he makes it seem so easy, but it must have involved a lot of deep thought, a lot of character analysis. I talk with my hands without thinking about it, but every move he makes with his hands is so deliberate and iconic. I talked in the piece about how every Star Trek novel I've ever read has a passage where Spock steepled his hands on the briefing room table. It shows he's in steepled his fingers. He's deep in thought. He's thinking through the problem. The wheels are turning. So it wasn't something that I could have pointed to before needing a piece to write about what's part of Spock's appeal to me. But that's definitely part of it, how he uses his hands and just how he carries himself in general to create that character.
And of course, there's always this too.
Of course, right? The famous salute, which I've never understood. They make such a big deal in so many Star Trek shows and movies about how humans have a hard time doing this. It's a human gesture to begin with.
That's true. That's true. But there are people who have a hard time doing it.
There must be.
Zach Quinto, actually, the current Spock, when he did his salute in the first. Yeah, Steve's showing us his. Let's see it, Steve. Can you do it? Both hands. Check it.
All right.
That's great. But Zach Quinto, if you look, his hand looks kind of funny when he holds it up at the end of the first picture, and it's because his fingers are glued together. Because he couldn't do it.
I understand they had to do the same thing with Celia Lovsky, who played T'Pau in A Long Time. They had to tie fingers together or something. I've been a fan so long and doing this for so long, if I hold up my hand up to wave, I have to make sure I'm not flashing the Vulcan salute, because I want to come off like a weirdo to somebody I'm just meeting for the first time.
That's great. Yeah, Celia's story was of course Leonard had introduced this from his Jewish background.
Right.
And that's a well-known story. I did a blog post on it. It's actually is it in the book? I don't remember if I put it in the book or not. I think I put it in the book.
Several of the essays allude to it, so
right. People do that. I did put it in the book. And actually, one of our contributors, Jonathan Gershom, a lot of times when people talk about the origins of that, they quote his article. But Celia couldn't do it, and Leonard said, no, this is so important. We've got to have this in here, and we've got to figure out a way. So they had her hold her finger off screen like this, and then she could pull it up. And then it's Bill Shatner in the third film, when he goes to see Dr. McCoy, he says, how many fingers am I holding up? If you look really closely, there's like fishing line or something with string holding his fingers together. Yeah. So it's prominently difficult for people to do. And any of you guys who want to jump in with a comment, just unmute your mic and come in. That's great. I'd love to have you here. Jump in. So. Mike, I appreciate that. That's great. And you also did a piece on In Search Of as well.
I promised you a piece that fall on Yesteryear, the animated episode. And I watched it several times and just couldn't come up with a thesis to write about. But I remembered that episode of In Search Of about the killer bees and how it scared the daylights out of me. So since it was not only Spocktober but Halloween, that seemed a good angle to pursue and to see what came of that.
That's great, and I like having that in there because it brings out an aspect of Nimoy's career that probably, especially a lot of our younger readers, don't know about. Steve, you were going to say something.
Ironically, I worked on In Search Of as well.
Oh, did you?
I did a lot. I did some of the creatures. I did the Elephant Man. I did the one about Lucy, the missing link, and several others. So they used to call me all the time on that show.
That's fantastic. I love that. So
Hollywood was actually a very small world. At least it was back then.
Right. I think it's a bit more diverse now. Like, in the old days, if you saw decent effects, you'd be like, oh, that must be ILM. And now it's like there are a lot of production houses who are doing a lot of different effects.
And Hollywood's really losing its footing, and it's it's always kind of been a monster. It's really tried to hold back the independent film market and keep independent artists from making good films by blocking them from being seen. Of course, now the cat's out of the bag. They can't do that anymore. I'm one of those myself. I left Hollywood. I came up here to Ventura to open up my own studio, make my own films, and no one's going to stop me from doing it or stop me from sharing them with the world. So I like this era very much.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's a great time for artisans to be emerging. That
incredible stuff that's on Netflix alone. A lot of their original series are incredible. I'm watching one now that I would never normally watch, but it's not sci-fi. It's called Lawnmower, which is about Walter Lawnmower, the sheriff in Wyoming, present day, who's kind of like a Sherlock Holmes almost.
right.
And he, much like Spock, is this wonderful human being who sets incredibly good example for all the rest of us of how to be an honest, decent man or woman, and just be a good person. It's an incredible series. A friend of mine had me watch it. It's like, it's a western. It's crime, another cop show, and no, it's not. And you just get so hooked into the character and all the other characters. I highly recommend it because he's another kind of Spock, kind of really. So
that's really cool.
It's a very but that again, this is independently produced, and there's no leash on it. So there's lots of spiritual and philosophical elements to it that speak to the soul, which I think are very important in creative filmmaking. Not about making money.
That's good. That's really good. And
but that's not what I'm interested in. And I'm doing a film series now, and the whole intent is not about the money. It's about making a difference, about showing things to other human beings and sharing with them things that are inside yourself, that are part of your own soul.
Yeah, I think that's so important, and opening that artistic window up to more people and keeping it less exclusive, I think has been really important. And I think Star Trek particularly inspires people in that regard, and I think Becky has something to say about that. If I can make sure you're unmuted there, Becky.
She has to unmute herself, I believe.
Becky, I think you have to unmute yourself. Can you do that?
Click on the mute symbol, microphone.
See, I don't think she can do that.
Okay, can
there
you
you
guys
are.
hear me?
Yeah,
Okay,
there you are.
now I
Great.
got it. I just wanted to mention there's a lot of really great Star Trek productions out there. Star Trek Continues, Star Trek Excelsior, Star Trek.
Axonar.
Axonar, yes, thank you. There's a whole bunch
Phase
of them in
2.
the Phase 2. There's a whole bunch, and they all explore humanity in a new way. But one of the things they do that some of the series didn't is they challenge humanity. They'll put situations up, and it's like a it's like a no-win situation, and people really have to challenge. And sometimes it may not be what we would do, but it's you guys, if Star Trek fans, should check some of these out, and then maybe write a blog post about them.
I'm on Star Trek Continues. In fact,
they're really fantastic. There's a lot of cool stuff. Sorry, say again, Steve. I was talking over you. Start over, please.
Sorry, I'd interrupt. Tomorrow I have the gentleman who plays Mr. Spock on Star Trek Continues is coming to my studio to have his ears kept.
That's fantastic.
Oh, that's cool.
And then another one I'm doing is, if you know who Paul Forrest is, are you familiar with Paul Forrest? Las Vegas Spock. He's an incredible look-alike to Leonard Nimoy, who does cosplay as Mr. Spock. And he's from Canada. He's down here at the Stanley Comic-Con right now. And I've been bugging him because he's been buying ears from me. And the last time he sent me money, I said, just send me the cost for one pair of ears. I'm going to send you several. Because he's doing this stuff to entertain people and for charities and to to keep this character going. So I thought it'd be really neat if the guy could have his own actual ears made that were, I'm going to do them the way I did them for Leonard. So he's finally coming up tonight at 7 o'clock on Sunday because that's the only time he can get here before he has to go back to Canada. And we're going to be casting his ears and making him ears. You can look him up right now. If you look up Paul Forrest on Google, go into images, you will see pictures of him. And it's quite amazing because although he doesn't look like Leonard that much here in the eyes, all the rest of him is an amazing look-alike. So it's I have been keeping up on all the fan-oriented material about Star Trek, which is really keeping the old show, the old Roddenberry Star Trek alive more than Hollywood is doing, because right now they're not doing that, in my opinion. Now, don't get me wrong, I like JJ and I like his other work, and I'll go see his next one. But so far, I have been bored by all three.
Fascinating. Fascinating.
Yeah.
I love the first Abrams flick. I hate the second one. So I'm divided.
As LeVar said, as he was caught getting into his limo, he looked right at the camera, the paparazzi, and said, "I want them to put the Roddenberry back in Star Trek."
I agree. Yeah, I think so.
It's completely removed. So
there's a certain amount of it. I get a certain amount of it in the first movie. I think partially because. And things that I like and things that I feel are good Star Trek themes, partially because I read that film differently than I think a lot of other people do. But right. But I guess that really is a great segue, Steve, into talking to Renee, because Renee, you kind of dipped into that controversy a little bit, didn't you, when it came to your essay? So go ahead and talk to us about that, the softer side of Spock.
Right, yeah. So it set a lot of people on edge, of course, and but I sort of see it as a very natural, we might even say logical progression, something that is necessary. I spend a lot of time in my essay just comparing, emotional outbursts, if you will, or not even outbursts, but between, Spock 1.0 and Spock 2.0. But at the end, basically make the case or the argument that in the same way that we need and demand and require, sort of contemporary modern day special effects in throwback films, we also have a similar need for sort of contemporary sensibilities in throwback films. So throwback films are always going to reflect our contemporary culture a little bit, maybe more than they do the culture to which they're alluding or throwing back to. So I make that conclusion that it's sort of impossible not to do any other, insofar as Spock in the new films is much more emotional. And that I sort of hint too that Spock in the first movie, I believe it is, when he goes through the mind meld with V'ger and he's going on that quest, and he sort of learns that pure logic is not good or not virtuous because it leaves no room for ultimate hope or beauty or meaning or truth. Or at least that's how I interpret that scene, and that this is, this sort of more emotional Spock is also a kind of product of that.
Well, could it be? I'm wondering here, because as you're talking about that, I think of something that's very important in the character of Spock that a lot of people talk about, which is balance. And I think that's something, as you watch the progress of the character from the beginning of the series, once Leonard and the writers kind of get into who Spock is, you get from the beginning of the first series all the way to, let's say, the first Abrams film, or even going to like the later original crew movies. You see Spock embracing more of his humanity, definitely keeping to his Vulcan values, but being more comfortable with his humanity, not making as many excuses for it as he does in the original series. But I wonder, because I feel like at this point, especially by the second film, like in the first film I could understand, like, okay, Spock's younger, he's a little more, he's a little out of balance, and he's gone through this, he's gone through that, he's gone through that. I could understand some of the emotional things that he did in that film. By the second film, I'm like, this is ridiculous. This is just like, how many times can we make Spock, go crazy in these movies? Is it possibly that, I doubt this is the way it's planned, but would it make sense to have a Spock who's growing in the other direction, who starts out with like too much emotion, and then kind of learns the value of logic? Do you think that, or would you like to see him just left as he is?
No, and my essay really does only deal with the first movie. It was written before the second movie had come out, and so, it's not something that really deals very much with the Wrath of Khan. But I think, and like you said, I'm not sure if that's the intention or if that's how it will play out as these movies continue to come out. But I think it would be sort of in the film best interest to see something like that happen, because that's exactly when you talk about Spock as a Christ figure. I think if we don't make our way back towards, like you said, some of that balance, then we might lose some of Spock's Christ-likeness in that way, because you think about Christ as both equally human and equally divine, and I was thinking too, as I was rereading my post about the Gospels and how some of the Gospels highlight different elements of Jesus, where some of the Gospels are really interested in him in showing that he is divine and that he is God, and others of the Gospels are much more interested in highlighting his humanity. Of course, none of them, all of them talk about both, but some of them are more interested in highlighting one over the other, and so I thought, that's something that can be useful to consider and remember as well as we think about, the best way, of course, to look at Spock is to look at him from several different angles, right?
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think that's an interesting quality of the way the Gospels are presented. That there's multiple angles, but I think Star Trek does the same thing, and a lot of ongoing narratives do the same thing, which I think is really important, to take one idea or one person or one icon, whatever it is, reinterpret it, retranslate it through new perspectives, because that's part of the human experience.
Yes.
That's part of how we value the narratives that we carry and that carry us, is that we share them in a way that incorporates multiple viewpoints.
And of course, that's much easier to do in a TV series than in a movie, but there we are.
Yeah, right, there we are.
Yeah.
And I saw that Becky had to leave us. Thank you, Becky, for being here. We appreciate you greatly, and thanks for kind of getting us on this trail. This has been fun. So I really appreciate her being there. Steve, do you have any thoughts on New Spock? Since we're on that topic.
To be completely honest, I was I should probably start by suggesting that I'm probably very biased. I mean, here I am. I grow up on Star Trek. I think when I'm in high school, I get the Making of Star Trek book, and I still have it, the paperback. It's actually in very good condition. And I remember looking through that book, looking at the pictures of the set, and the crew, and the actors, and the props, and everything. Wouldn't it be neat to be there and actually work with these people and be part of this? And of course, when Star Trek ended, it was very disappointing. And and I went to college, and college was basically, for me, was going to the American Zoetrope and working as a patsy with Francis Coppola, and getting sort of my film schooling there. I became friends with Francis, and eventually that closed down, the Zoetrope. And so I went to Hollywood too with the rest of them. I came down in '73, and I worked making films. I also worked as a prosthetic makeup artist, and I got in the union, and I met Fred Phillips. We became friends, and of course, Fred Phillips, you're not familiar with him. He is the makeup artist for Star Trek, the original series, and a really wonderful man that we all loved. And one day he called me up and asked me if I wanted to work on Star Trek. And this was late '77, early '78, somewhere right around in there, and which I thought was a joke, And he said, no, we're making a movie, and would you like to work on it with me? I need your help. So I actually got to go work on Star Trek. My first job, of course, was to make his ears, which was just, all I could do to keep from fading. It was so, being a fan, and then meeting Neece Leonard, and so here I am immersed in the original family of Star Trek, the original creator, Roddenberry, who I got to know very well and got to be friends with, and he was very kind to me, and I'm working with him and Robert Wise, and I'm just in cloud nine. This is Star Trek. And of course, later on, I went on to work with him again on The Last Picture and then the Count at Farpoint. So I was immersed, and I was always around Gene at the conventions. It was, oh, hey, Gene, hey, Majel. And so I'm very biased, make a long story short. And so along comes this new Star Trek that JJ's doing, and I go see it, and I felt like somebody just gave me a 911S but left the engine out of it. What a letdown. I can't drive this thing. It's nothing like the original car. And that's kind of how I looked at it. And everyone told me I was being too hard on it, and I listened to Leonard talk about giving it a chance and how he really supported it. And I understand that. He wanted to see Star Trek go on. But I tried to like it. I kind of liked the first one, sort of.
Yeah.
And they did just enough with the first one to kind of lure the old Roddenberry fan group into it, the original fans, the original culture of Star Trek people, to get them tagged on, and then they get to the next film and they just blew it all off.
Yeah.
I had problems with the Enterprise. I didn't like the way it looked. I had problems. I had problems with everything. Spock most of all. So, but yet I love his other work, JJ. Now JJ took it very personally. I found out the hard way because I have my own show online. Steve Neill's Garage, SNG Studio, and I didn't realize it, but he was watching the darn show. The thing is that JJ is a huge fan of makeup effects artists, and of course his biggest fan of all that he is Dick Smith. And of course then I realized he's reading Fangoria and Cinefex and Cinefantastique and all these magazines, and so when he was growing up as a kid, he was very in tune with myself and all the other prosthetic makeup artists out there were doing them. So, I'm talking to a friend of mine, and he says, I got a call from Bad Robot, you got to watch what you're saying about JJ Star Trek, because he took it kind of hard, and so, because I was a little harsh, but I actually wasn't so harsh as I criticized his choices and about the Enterprise. My friend who made the props for In the Darkness gave me a prototype phaser that he made for JJ to suggest how he could better make more contemporary the old original phaser. And it's beautiful. I mean, you look at this phaser, and it looks like the old one, but it is, exactly, it's been, I can't think of a word for it, but it is much more contemporary, bringing it into our culture today, how it would look. It was beautiful, but he turned it down. And I said, on the video, I said, I don't know who designed this, but I wish the heck they had designed the Enterprise.
Mm-hmm.
Because, they could learn a lot from this, and that's what got him mad. So I made a public apology, and of course, all's well, and Robot Land and the demo. So I've been through the ringer on this whole thing with the new Star Trek. Because a lot of the fans do like the new one, but most of them don't date back as far as I do.
Yeah. That's true for me, certainly. I mean, I started watching the original series.
Right.
I'd seen a little bit of it before that point, but I really started watching straight through in 2008.
Yeah.
So I had just finished the first season of the original series, and I went to go see the JJ film, and I loved it. I enjoyed it greatly, but I didn't have all those years of background in that version of it. For me, it was the movies.
Yeah, to each their own. Nobody should start a war over these topics,
That's right.
At least of all this subject. So, and I think everybody should get along. And so I do. I say I appreciate you like that. I just did. I would never say what people say on Facebook and other social media you'll say you like something, they'll say, how could you like that? That was crap, and they use all these profanities and stuff. And it's like, that wouldn't be my approach, because like the person who influenced me, Mr. Spock, as a young man, I don't take those approaches to conversations regarding my like or dislike about something you may or may not like. You know, so it's just right. Learn from Mr. Spock. I'm sorry, but I didn't appreciate that quite the way you did. It would be a better way of putting it. So,
Right.
Thank you, Leonard, and thank you, Mr. Spock, and thank you, G. Bud.
That's great. That's great. Let's go. I think let's go ahead and go to Neil. You've been and I see Becky's back, and she says Star Trek Into Darkness, like the original timeline better, but Star Trek Into Darkness did present some good themes. The television shows were always stronger when it comes to dialogue and morality stories. Yeah, I agreed with that. I mean, and really the films in general have from well, I wouldn't say so much the original series. I mean the motion picture, but most of the films from 2 on have been more action-oriented as films in general than the television series was, because that tends to work in movies. But the best ones are able to balance that really well. So yeah, let's go to Neil Shirley and let's talk about your contributions to Spockology. And
all right, I'll turn the light on while I'm talking now.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Oh gosh, thanks. My son decided to turn that light on too. Something I've been thinking as we're listening is going back to hands, and a lot of how that came into play for me too. One of the things I thought about was again about the motion picture, and that moment when Spock says, you know, this simple feeling of holding Kirk's hand was, you know, valuing that, understanding that there is value in that. And for me, I think both of my pieces in the book kind of trace back to a moment several years ago when I was asked to write a piece about a wisdom figure in my life, and I couldn't really think of who that might be. And it just sort of struck me as I was doing this in church, and it suddenly struck me that Spock is the wisest person I could think of, and I immediately had a realization that in our church, when we stand to say the Apostles' Creed, I always stand with my hands clasped behind my back, a la Spock, in that kind of that at-rest position, and all that kind of led to a thought process of how I deliberately began doing that as a kid, because I saw Spock do it, and I wanted to be like him in many ways. I guess I've lost it here again, but
well, you're talking about the wisdom of Spock.
As wise as Spock is, as far as trying to be of a logical approach about how you approach criticizing others, from a less emotional perspective, that there are other aspects to his character as well that are worth emulating, whether it's kind of a posture and holding yourself upright, but also just being present in the moment. And as he learns throughout the series, and then especially throughout the movies, is that it's okay to feel. It is okay to have emotions, and I think that's one of the interesting things about Spock's journeys, especially as the movies came about. That in a way, I think, kind of as you were saying earlier, this is probably stretching it too much, but it's almost like, and even through the Abrams movies, Nimoy's appearances in the Abrams movies, that he has almost become fully Vulcan and fully human, as Christ was human and divine. That Spock I think is finally, by the end, has really accepted both halves of himself. He's not at war with himself as much, and again, I think it's meaningful to us as nerds to follow that example.
Yeah, I think that's great. You know, conflicted characters, I think, often are really appealing to us because we all have those conflicts within ourselves. We all have, you know, the voice in our head that is saying good things about ourselves and about the world around us, and the voice in our head that's, you know, not so much. And what's interesting about Spock is there's not a good voice and a bad voice. It's just like two different approaches toward the same goal. You know,
Right.
Is he going to, and if he goes too far in either direction, he messes up. I just watched the Galileo 7 the other day, you know, where, you know, it's like, I'm creating a disaster and people are dying under my command, but I've done everything logically. Everything that I've done has been perfectly logical. And what McCoy and others convince him of, and try to help him understand in that episode, and what I think he finally realizes is that he needs to balance his logic with humanity and with instinct and with compassion and with you know, fast thinking and things that are unplanned and being, you know, all those sorts of things that make us human. He needs to balance that. And, you know, in typical Spock fashion in the original series, he kind of explains it away at the end. Well, yeah, it was perfectly logical, and, you know, and Kirk's like, yeah, so you decided it was perfectly logical to have an emotional outburst. And as time goes on, I think that episode is a great moment of that balance. As time goes on, that balance grows.
It will be interesting to see. It's hard to imagine that there is a long-term Spock character arc planned in the current Abrams verse, but it'll be interesting to watch to see if there is almost that reverse pattern of him, as we were mentioning earlier, you know, of him being more impulsive and I don't know, at war with his emotions in these early films, and maybe, you know, as the series progresses, he will become more the calm, thoughtful, logical, balanced Spock that we all know and love.
Yeah, that's fascinating. You wrote another piece for the book called Being Leonard Nimoy, which I actually chose to end the book with because I felt like it just really was a great note to end on. We had a little dialogue there at the end between Spock and Nimoy, and I was like, well, that's a great way to encapsulate the book. So talk to me a little bit about Being Leonard Nimoy. Not that you've been Leonard Nimoy, but...
Yeah, that piece came about after Leonard Nimoy's death. Here I am getting a little emotional just thinking about it. Spock, help me! No emotions now. But when Leonard Nimoy died, I cried, and it struck me as illogical that I was crying at the death of a celebrity, of someone I have never met, who I did not know personally, and yet for really the first time that I could think of, I was crying at the death of a celebrity. And just thinking about it, I realized how important Nimoy had been in my life, more even than just Star Trek, more than just Spock. I could trace back Leonard Nimoy moments throughout my life, and I listed a lot of that in that piece. I actually thought of more later after I had written the piece. I thought, oh yeah, and what about that? And what about that? I don't know. For me, it was just a profound effect on me to think about how important he had been, how many things I remembered about him, how many things I sought out because he was in it. I mean, you know, Lord knows I love me some Shatner. You know, Shatner, he's Shatner, but I have never made it a point to seek out and watch every Shatner project because, I mean, come on. There's some choices there, but it's not the same with Leonard Nimoy. With Leonard Nimoy, it always felt worthwhile to find out what he was doing, to see what he was doing, and the amazing range of work that he did. I don't know. It continues to astound me. He was really able to, from writing that play, that one-man play about Van Gogh, that when I found out he had done it, I made sure that I could see it. I watched Mission Impossible because he was on it. In Search Of was great, and of course the only reason I tuned it in at first was because he was there, but I stayed because it was great. And I don't know. I'm curious how those episodes hold up these days. I haven't seen it since then. I think my feelings on things like Bigfoot and the Bermuda Triangle have certainly changed since the original shows. But anyway, I really enjoyed writing the piece, and I was really touched that you chose it to end the book. I appreciate it, and thank you for that.
Oh, well, I thank you for being a part of it. I thank all of you for being a part of it. It's been fantastic. Of course, Steve's story is in the book as well. I took transcriptions from 2 different videos that he did telling the story and sort of edited it together into one thing. And I'm just so glad and proud to have that in there. All of you, it's just wonderful. While you were talking there, Neil, Becky sent a message and said that she had a sense. She had a real sense of loss and is now realizing just how diverse Nimoy's talents were, and also mentioned his great voice as a narrator too. And Brandon also said that he just watched, and I saw this on Facebook that he posted, that he just watched Vincent on Hulu the other day, and it was really great. So if you guys want to see Vincent, check it out on Hulu. That's really cool. I've wanted to see that for years. I'm so excited. So that's really cool. Let's go. We are coming close to an hour here, and I don't want to go too long. I know we could probably all sit here and talk for a couple of hours, but I know everybody has things to do too. I'd like to go ahead and get to Steve here. Get back to Steve and talk just a little bit more about your story and your meeting Leonard Nimoy, and then we'll announce our winner of our ears if we don't have any more questions.
I'm looking at the clock here, and I've got Paul coming up here pretty soon. I've been constantly communicating, and so I'll be making Mr. Spock's ears again here in a pretty short period of time. And I've actually had to make dinner and get it on the stove, so it's actually ready by the time. It's a big coordination, but
right. So we got to hurry.
One of the things I wanted to talk about was what an amazing thing it was to meet his son, Adam. And how that all happened was that when I saw him doing the campaign, I couldn't believe that he was getting the money that he needed to do the documentary. Now, he had planned to do this documentary. Him and his dad planned to do this together, but his dad passed away, and he wanted to continue it on. Unfortunately, a lot of the fans don't learn from their love of Mr. Spock too well, and we're very nasty about why does he need our money to make a documentary about his father when he has all his dad's money. Well, first of all, none of us know that, nor is it our business. But also, CBS was pretty nasty about him using his father's image as Mr. Spock in the documentary called For the Love of Spock. You know, I mean, really? They wanted hundreds of thousands of dollars for the rights. So that's why he needed to do that campaign. And as he told me personally, you know, although they raised $700,000, it's still not near enough. He is putting a lot of his own money and other people's investment money into the project, all worthwhile to see his father's vision through. So I made a bunch of the ears from the original molds of his dad's in shadow boxes, and I gave him 5 of them. I would have given him more, but that's all he asked for, to help raise higher perks for people who spent over $1,000 or more. They would get that perk. Then I said, you know, I can recreate how I did the ears back in those days because they were done much differently than we do them today. And originally we're going to cast his ears and make him up as Spock, but he felt very odd about it, and I understood it. And so Kai, his assistant, who's a wonderful human being, was picked to do that. And so they came up, his film crew, a couple of times, and we cast his ears, Kai's ears, and then I documented the process, and they shot it, and then they came back up, and they had Adam come in to see his assistant all made up in one of the original uniforms, and that was a wonderful experience being with Adam, because he's a lot like his dad. He looks like his dad in a lot of ways, and his persona is very much like his dad, which makes sense, you know. But he was a wonderful guy, and it was really kind of a full circle for me from, you know, when I was first brought into Paramount by Fred, and I remember that first day going to the Gower entrance and parking in the Gower lot, walking through, going past the guard, going to the original stage where it was shot, the original makeup lab, and the first thing he does is throw down a pair of foam ears from the original TV show that had never been used. They were in good condition still, and he said, I need you to replicate these exactly. Can you do it? And I said, of course. I was just an hog Evan. He gave me the castings that he already made off of Leonard's ears, and I started sculpting them, and then later that late evening, or actually late afternoon, early evening, I was working there late, and as you know from my previous reaccounting of this, there was my light was blocked by a shadow and a presence behind me, and I heard, are those my ears? And I mean, I knew right away. I mean, well, obviously he's asking if those are his ears, and that voice, right? So I turn around and I look up like that, it's towering over me as I sit in my chair, and gives me this lovely grin. It says, very nice, and nice to meet you. And then he walked off, and that was my first encounter with Leonard. Even though he smiled and you know, had that charisma, he was very much Mr. Spock. It was, right. You know, I mean, that was always his problem. I am not Spock, I am Spock, which he finally came to realize. He was more than just a character. He really was that character as a human being. He just brought it in to his characterization of Spock, the good human being that he is. So, you know, the whole thing with Adam coming up, it was just an amazing thing, and they kept offering me money for my time, for my materials, and all the work that I put into helping them, and I didn't want it. And they're still trying, come on, please. So after everybody left and Adam left, Kai was still there because I had to clean the ears off him and stuff, and he said, oh, Adam wanted you to have this, and he brings up this plastic bag. It's a picture of McCoy and Spock from the first motion picture in a hallway. I think it's from the first picture. No, actually, it's from Star Trek 6. I worked on the first one and the last one. And it was signed, right? And I just assumed it was, you know, a stamp or something like that. No, this was from his father's personal collection. Wow. And he gave it to me. So, you know, and that was just so sweet of him. And then they still wrote to me and said, you know, we'd still like to give you some money. And I said, I won't take any money from you, but if you don't have any use for the blue tunic, you know, after you're done with it, I'll take that. Because I have a velour one that is an exact replica of the first season, and I wanted to add that to my collection. And Kai said, well, I'll make sure we're all done with it. We'll send it to you. So that was my so, you know, since they insisted, you know, I spent a great deal more money and time than that was worth. That was never the point, you know. Right. You know, the little kid in me wants that tunic. So, because it was Spock's too, you know. I mean, it's the right one. It's the blue. It's Sciences. It's second season uniform. So, it's been an amazing experience working on Star Trek, and I'm really glad for the fan shows because this allows me to still contribute and still do the same thing all these years later. As I have 2 Mr. Spocks on the way to me right now. So it's really, it's magic. Thank you, universe. I love it.
Oh, that is just wonderful, Steve.
I'm still excited as much of a little kid about it as I was back in high school. I am today. Nothing has changed.
That's wonderful. That's just wonderful. I'm so glad that you've been able to join us, Steve. I'm so glad that all of you have been able to join us. I am going over to the giveaway right now to find out who our winner is. Aha! And I see the name of the winner, and I'm going to send a message to you, Steve, and you can announce the winner right here.
Via which? Switching glasses.
I'm gonna do it on the chat window on the side.
I apologize for the constant nosedive, but my allergies drive me nuts, and I need to get my decongestant. But we can wait on that. So where's the message?
I'm sending it right now. Okay. That is the name of our winner, Steve. If you would please announce the winner of the giveaway.
The winner is John Marston. Did I say that right?
Yes, you did.
Congratulations. You are the winner of a casting of Leonard's ears from my original sculpture from the original molds from Star Trek The Next Generation.
The motion picture.
The motion picture. God. All right. My sinuses are definitely starting
That's
to
all right.
my brain. Yes.
That's all right.
Star Trek The TMP. So.
Great. Thank you so much, Steve. And I know you've got to head on. And thank you for all that you've done for Star Trek and for us here at the Undiscovered Country Project for being here with us today.
My sincere pleasure.
Well, thank you. It's ours as well. And live long and prosper to you.
Live long and prosper.
Thank you.
And we'll see you next time.
Yes, sir. Take care.
You too. Bye, all.
All right. Thank you. All right. So that was it, folks. We have announced our winner. We've had a wonderful time with Steve Neill and with all of you here. I know Neil had to leave. He's going to a church dinner and had to get out the door. Anybody else want to say a few words before we head out? You can freely unmute and talk.
This is Becky. If anyone left on the panel care to comment, I'm wondering what you think of Leonard Nimoy's and Spock's appearance in the TNG episode, Season 5, where he's from the Romulus. I thought it was a good character development. If any of you want to comment.
Yeah, that's Unification Part 1 and 2. Anybody want to field that?
Curious.
Overall, it's not my favorite performance of Nimoy's as Spock's, but I like a good deal about it. And my favorite moment in it is when he is talking with Captain Picard at the table about his desire to see these two cultures come back together. And Captain Picard is kind of trying to talk him out of it. Come back to the Federation. This can never work. And Nimoy, as Spock, looks at the flower in a vase on the table and says, one can begin to reshape a landscape with a single flower. And I think it's one of the perfect Spock moments throughout the whole franchise because it's acknowledging a difficulty but not declaring it impossible and setting forth a kind of logical hope. And we've talked a lot in this conversation about Spock balancing the two elements of his personality. And I think that's one moment where Nimoy plays that very, very well.
That is beautiful, Mike, and I would like to mention too that in the book Spockology there is a great piece called called Spock, Light of the Romulans by Mickey Haste, and so that is it's based on Spock's work in trying to reunify Vulcans and Romulans together. So which of course comes from that episode. So I think you might find that interesting. So yeah, great bit there, Mike. I think that's absolutely a great moment in that episode, and a great thing for us to hang on to and remember. Renee, looked like you had something to say about Becky's question as well.
Yeah, I was thinking about that episode and Spock's reference to Kirk and his sort of cowboy politics. I can't maybe Picard uses
cowboy
that
diplomacy.
Oh
yes,
yeah.
You know, and that comes up too, I think, in the Abrams film. You know, where Spock is talking about, tricks I learned from an old friend, and you know how he sort of learned to trust his instincts more, and he's learned to, you know, and there's that conversation between, you know, old Spock and young Spock at the end of the film too, where you know, young Spock is like, why didn't you just tell me yourself, you know, and so he's, you know, talking about how he's able to kind of see the bigger picture, right, because of this balance, I think, that he's achieved. And then the only thing that I was going to ask, Becky, is if there was anything particular, you know, anything specifically that you wanted to ask about as far as Spock in those two episodes in the Next Generation.
Well, I think my favorite part of the whole episode was all of Spock's moments, of course, but the dialogue between Spock, Data, and then Spock, Data, and Picard being together, because those are my three characters. And Spock and Data have a conversation about one of them is trying to claim his humanity, meaning Data, while Spock is trying to balance an individual's theory. And I always get the impression that he was trying to avoid his humanity, and I thought that was a powerful scene to have them both icons in their own right in the same dialogue. That's just one of the reasons. That, and the other part, of course, I think there's some symbolism behind the idea of Spock going to Romulan, because they were like the outcast, more than the Klingons even. So just those two thoughts.
Yeah, Becky, I think that's that dialogue between Spock and Data is actually one of my favorite bits of dialogue. It's just beautiful. What Data says to him is that, I have striven all my life to gain that which you have, and are trying to push away. I'm totally paraphrasing, but you're trying to get away from something you have naturally that I have worked all my life to try to achieve.
Mm-hmm.
And in the same way, Spock says, yeah, you come by naturally what I strive for all my life. And so to me, from my perspective, as I'm looking at Spock as a Christ figure and looking at Data as a Christ figure, they both have dual natures. They both have a nature that can be called human and divine, or human and superhuman. Spock has his, human aspect, and then his Vulcan aspect, which can be seen as superhuman. And then Data has his obvious superhuman aspect, which is that he's an android, but his humanity is there as well. His desire to be human is because he's created by a human being who has imbued his creation with something of himself, much the way we're imbued with something of God. And what we see in Data is we see the superhuman becoming human, and in Spock we see the human trying to become superhuman. And in both of these cases, what they end up doing is they mirror each other in their journey, but they arrive at similar places of balance. And I think it's interesting because it's two aspects, really, of the incarnation, because Jesus is a divine, pre-existent, eternal, God becoming human, condescending to be more human and to embrace humanity. But at the same time, he's a human who transcends his humanity so much as to both prove and attain divinity. So I find that really, really fascinating. And the interchange between those two characters and the way those two characters are related, because Data was, next generation Spock. That was the whole idea.
Mm-hmm.
And to see the similarities and also the differences in the way those characters interact with one another is fascinating.
To coin a phrase.
To coin a phrase. Anybody else have anything to... Is somebody saying something? I heard a voice. Sorry, I heard a voice like it was trying to come through and it wasn't. Renee says over here in chat, do you want to say what you said in the chat, Renee?
Sure, yeah. As Mike was talking earlier about Spock's hands, I thought that was really fascinating, and it's not something I think I'd ever thought about before. And then somebody else was talking about what he does with his hands during church and how there's that connection for him to Spock, and I thought, gosh, I'm never going to be able to take the Eucharist in the same way again. But I was thinking too, Mike, when you were talking about Tuvok, because as I mentioned earlier, right now I'm immersed in the Voyager series, and so and enjoying it, even though everyone scoffs at it, sort of. There's a point, I don't know if you're familiar with that series, Mike, but there's a point, one episode where Tuvok is explaining the process of meditation, and he specifically talks about what to do with your hands, and I remember it being something along this lines. I don't know if you...
I watched Voyager when it was on. I've not gone back to it. I did like Tuvok. I thought Tim Russ did a very nice job creating a Vulcan character who felt familiar but also new. Do you remember what he had to say about that specifically? Because I don't.
Yeah, the thing I remember the most was this part with the index fingers, right, where he talks about pressing your index fingers together as a way of sort of like concentrating, basically, you know, and he, I think, specifically said something about like a light, like a point of light, you know, you press your fingers, and it must have been early in the series when, oh, I've forgotten her name.
Kes.
Yes, when he's working with Kes. So anyway, he talks about, you know, the pointing your fingers together. Anyway, and this is something that I sort of do anyway without thinking about. And now, of course, I'm like, oh gosh, you know, thinking.
You're following Nimoy's good hand steps there.
Yeah.
I bet I don't know, but I bet they did that or wrote that with Nimoy in mind. But I like it, and I did like that relationship with Tuvok and Kes. I was one of the few fans I know who was sad when she left the show.
Yeah.
I thought she was a very interesting character.
Yeah.
You too?
Yeah, absolutely.
And nothing against 7 of 9, but I liked Kes a lot. I found her very interesting.
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of people found her irritating. I think the last few episodes of her character are really poorly written for her character, and I think her character arc at the end is dealt with very, very haphazardly. But yeah, I wept like a baby when she left the show. But you know, speaking of hands again, this is cool, Mike. You're kind of being our through line for the whole event. But speaking of hands again, we talk about this again, and I think we have discussed. We've talked about how this has been discussed at some length, where it comes from Jewish tradition. It comes from the Kohanim, who are blood descendants of the Aaronic priesthood. I think it's the Aaronic priesthood. Anyway, the priesthood. If Gershom was here, he could tell me for sure. But they use this during a particular prayer. Actually, they do it this way, or they will put it together like this. And this is what Nimoy explains. Is that this is the letter Shin in Hebrew, which is the first letter of Shaddai, which is the name of God. But then also it is the first letter of Shekinah, which is the manifest glory of God, which is also considered the feminine aspect of God. And so it's really fascinating to me that, you know, our Christ figure, at least as we see him as a Christ figure, comes and greets us literally in the name of El Shaddai, of God. And so I use this now, and I'm really focused on it. I find I will do this. I put my hands together this way or this way to remind myself of the presence of God, and I do it, you know, various other times too. Okay. Any other questions or thoughts? I see someone has joined in here. I'm not sure if you're here. Can I say hello to you? Hi. Okay. Yeah, you're just watching. Okay. So any other questions or comments before we probably had to wrap up here pretty quickly. But any other thoughts anybody wants to share or questions anybody has?
Thanks for letting me come on.
Thanks for being here, Brandon. Do you want to say anything more about the ears or anything that you're involved with, or you've been kind of quiet, but I know you tend to be.
I can give a shout out for Larry Nemechek. He just started something called Portal 47.
Yes.
Look it up on Facebook. That's all I'll say. I don't want to say too much about it, but it's pretty cool. We learn inside things about Star Trek on it.
Very cool. Very good.
I guess I'm hearing a delay or something.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of that going on. But anyway, Brandon, we really appreciate you being here. Did you have any question for Mike or Renee or?
Well, no, but I'll check y'all stuff out. But I said in the chat I would have liked Spock to have been in Star Trek Nemesis. That would have been a better story, and even maybe 09 instead of blowing up Romulus. And Nemesis, what happened in Nemesis 2, maybe going back and seeing what happened after unification.
Yeah. See, yeah, I agree with that. That would have been really fascinating and really enjoyable to see as well. That's a story that I would like to see followed more, and maybe it has been in novels. I think maybe it has, but I'd love to see that on film. Spock's work with Romulus. Anyway.
Yeah, I wonder if.
Well, I'm reading a book right now. Typhon. I can't say it right.
Typhon
Pact.
Pact.
Yeah, number 3. Spock
Typhon
is on
Pact,
Romulus in that book. Yeah, books do deal with it more.
Okay.
Spock is a citizen now of Romulus.
Oh, wow.
Okay. Fascinating.
That is interesting.
I guess we'll have to check those books out. Renee, you were going to say something, I think, just a second ago?
Oh, I was just asking. I was going to ask if Becky knew anything about it. She was talking earlier about fan fiction, or specifically the spin-off shows, right? But based on her surprise reaction here, I'm guessing not.
I don't know all of them. There's too much. I've been watching some of the series. My best advice is to try to find a blog which tells you which one to read first, because some of them do delve into, what happened before Romulus was destroyed in the Prime timeline. They delve into that more, but it's so huge I can't possibly tell you where to start. I would suggest so that you recognize they're not canon. So, but I think the better ones. I'm a real big fan of the Shatnerverse, just because it's fun. I think some of the Star Trek continues are the ones that try to emulate the original series. If you're really a Spock fan, maybe the best to start out with. But that's just my view.
Yeah, Star Trek Continues is really interesting and really doing some very cool stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, I highly recommend those as well. And
Thank you.
Vic Mignogna is the guy behind those, and Larry Nemechek, actually, who Brandon mentioned, used to play Bones on that series. I think he had to leave and they got another actor. But anyway, okay. Anything else that you want to ask Becky or Mike and Renee want to say?
I just want to say thank you for a great panel. This is awesome. Look forward to reading the book and hope we can have more of these, and maybe even request that maybe we still start delving, once you finish all the Star Trek and you've done everything you can with the series, maybe you should start delving into the books, into the fan films, and seeing what you think.
That would be interesting.
I know.
Kevin just had an aneurysm.
It's a stretch, but really there's a lot there.
I kind of plan to spend the rest of my days on the Star Trek I have, but thank you for the kind suggestion.
Becky, sounds like you have a lot to contribute from that sector.
I'm just getting started. Believe me, I'm not even halfway there. I've never seen a franchise developed the way Star Trek has. There are hundreds of books, comics, you name it.
Yep.
It's impossible. It's huge.
That's why I gave up and just said, all right, TV shows and movies, and that's it. I'm out.
Yeah.
It's been a journey. Well, thank you, Becky, for being here and for contributing to the conversation. Mike, anything from you before we go?
No, just thank you so much for what you're doing. I was so glad when I found your blog and found it very engrossing, trying to find synonyms for fascinating. But it really is, and I appreciate your insights, even when I disagree with them. I know we had some back and forth about the first Abrams movie. But I mean, I'll be interested. Will your book next year have your take on Into Darkness? Because
yes,
now is not the time to start that conversation, I guess. But
right, but yeah, Into Darkness does play into the Gospel according to Star Trek. In that book, I try to address. It's hard, but I try to address every era of the series, from original series on through Abrams verse, to one degree or another. So
great.
Yeah,
I look forward to that, and thank you for organizing this and for the Spockology book and for giving me the chance to contribute to it.
Well, thanks for your contribution and for being here as well, Mike. I appreciate you greatly and your support of all we do here. Renee, anything from you before we head out?
Yeah, just again to reiterate what Mike was saying, thank you for the invite and for bringing us all together. I mean, this is a really kind of a beautiful thing, right? To be able to get together with people like-minded and sort of Star Trek nerds, right? And just be able to spend the Sunday afternoon hanging out, chatting about all sorts of various things that, things I'd never thought of before, and other things that are, everyone's thought of that are really controversial that we never get anywhere. We're never going to like convert anybody. But
Right.
yeah, no, this has been great, and it's just really exciting. Something, it's exciting to be a part of. So thank you.
All right. Thank you all for being here. Thanks to Steve Neill and to Neil Shirley. It's hard to go from one Neil to the other. But thank you to both of you guys for being here. I know you both had to leave. And to Becky and Brandon and our guest there. Hi, how you doing? And Renee and Mike. And for everybody watching. And just keep looking out. Spockology is available now in paperback and on Kindle, on Amazon. And you can pick it up there and check out more things that are going on at kevincneece.com. That's where I'll be, and you can find me on Facebook, Kevin C. Neece and Undiscovered Country Project as well. And thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Kevin.
Live long and prosper. Thank you.
Thank you.